my fellow Americans. This evening, I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell, and to share a few final thoughts with you, my countrymen. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Dwight D. Eisenhower's farewell address to the nation in 1961 is one of the most famous and frequently cited speeches having to do with modern-day military expansion. Even 50-some years later, this speech is still very relevant. Today, Americans spend over $680 billion on the military, even more if you include other defense-related budgets. This is higher than it's ever been in history, and it's 50% of every tax dollar. Global military spending totals over $1 trillion, and about 50% of that, over 50% of that is ours. We spend more than our next 10 allies combined, and notice that these are allies, the next 10 highest spenders. Recent terror attacks, like the attack on the World Trade Centers during 9/11, have been used as justification for the higher spending, but it always hasn't been like this. Following World War II, the entire world was in shambles, except for the US. Europe was destroyed and an enormous chunk of the Russian population was killed, but the US was more prosperous than ever. We had booming industries and the country was put to work in the arms industry. All factories were converted to produce arms. Following the war, under Eisenhower's direction, the military started to ramp down. Then came Korea and the communism scare. The US and Russia being the two prevailing superpowers after World War II, there was a huge ideological fight between capitalism and communism. Both sides were building huge armies and possessed nuclear weapons. The first of the proxy wars was in Korea. Spending increased as troops were shipped off to the small Asian country. Following the armistice signed, spending again started to decrease, but it didn't last long.
It's on us. And to maintain that peace requires strength. America has never gotten in a war because we were too strong.
Reagan was the first president to popularize the concept that we could outspend and bankrupt the Soviet Union in an arms race. Peace through strength is what it was called, and since the 80s, the budget has been increasing due to this ideological viewpoint. The 9/11 terror attacks were used as justification for the largest spending increases thus far. We started 2 huge wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan, even though 9 of the 12 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. Today we are spending over $680 billion a year, but we were only spending $200 billion at the peak of the Iraq War. It's estimated that the Iraq and Afghanistan wars will cost over $4 trillion by the end of the decade. With defense spending taking up about half of the federal budget, many may be interested where the money actually goes. The money is split between a bunch of different departments. There are different branches of the military that need to be taken into consideration, with each getting different categories of spending. A lot of spending goes to research and development and to military contractors to develop these technologies. Nuclear weapons and their upkeep, for example, aren't even included in the federal defense budget. Large sums of money also go to the FBI, CSA, and NSA. These black box intelligence organizations don't even report how much they spend. The CIA also runs the U.S. drone program, and since it is classified, we don't actually know how much is being spent there, but we assume it's hugely expensive. The U.S. has over 700 military bases in 38 countries. We have over 50,000 troops still in Korea, and we pay for Japan's defense. Huge amounts of spending also go to research and development of new weapons and machines. The defense industry employs huge amounts of people, and they continue to crank out weapons. For example, there are several thousand tanks sitting in a Pentagon lot that the military said they didn't want or need, but were built anyway. Another thing to take into consideration is veteran care. It is hugely expensive to provide care for all these wounded veterans returning from serving their country. Let's revisit Eisenhower's famous speech. To quote him, "The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete highway. We paid for a single fire plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We paid for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people."
So let me ask you, if a guy on your block was so frightened of mostly non-existent prowlers that he spent all his resources on alarm systems and guns and cameras, So much so that he didn't even have enough money left to maintain his home or send his kids to college? Would you call him brave?
America badly needs reinvestment in education and infrastructure, as well as healthcare. Bill Maher takes this point to the extreme, but he does have a good one. In today's world, with manufacturing mostly overseas, education is how you get ahead in the world, and with America increasingly falling behind, we have less innovation. Eisenhower was one of the most conservative, best generals in the world has ever known. The military budget could be cut in half, and we would still spend more than the next 10 countries combined. If this were to happen, I would argue that it'd actually make us more safe, because now we have all this money to spend on America's crumbling infrastructure, schools, and healthcare. Let's start by taking a look at the CIA's drone program, which has been ramped up hugely under the Obama administration. We fly unmanned drones in countries like Yemen, where we aren't even technically at war or in a conflict. The drones kill indiscriminately, and often women and children and other civilians are the targets by accident of drone strikes. Even if the target we end up killing is a terrorist, these radical groups can still use this as propaganda to get more people to join their fight. If we want to truly stop the spread of terrorism, we should invest more into education among the populations of these countries and marginalize the radical groups. If we continue to use drone strikes, we continue to look like Western invaders. It is important to support more moderate groups. Just look at what happened in Iraq. We removed the government, and in the power vacuum that followed, the terrorist group ISIS was able to come in and fill the void. We attempted to force values on a people we knew little about and whose country was destroyed after the war. The war in Iraq was voted illegal by the United Nations, and we lost the respect of many nations during that decade. This isn't how you stay ahead. The U.S., by most accounts, is the greatest force for good in the world. We give more foreign aid than any other country, and we graciously accept immigrants. We don't need to spend this much money on fighting terrorism that we have created. It's time to reinvest in America, build more schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Fans of small government should be on board with this message, as it is one of the most bloated government programs. Cut the military budget in half, and I guarantee you we will not be any less safe.
Like, how does that compare to the recent health care bill? Like, what's the...
Oh, the recent health care bill was $1 trillion for 10 years, over 10 years. But we're talking about $1.6 trillion in 1 year.
$1.6 trillion. So we could have...
Yeah, exactly. Next time you hear that the government needs to cut funds for providing medical care to the children of laid-off workers, or that supplemental unemployment funds are running out, next time you hear that federal funds that are needed to fund extra teachers at your school are being cut, or that Social Security benefits need to be cut back, or retirement age needs to be increased to 70, next time you hear your local post office has to be shut down for lack of funds, next time you hear that Medicare benefits need to be reduced, think about that 53% of your tax payment that's going to finance the most enormous war machine the world has ever known.